Hey everybody, it's Bob Crossan, Senior Managing Editor for Water and Waste Digest. Today I have with me Emilio Tenuta. He is Senior Vice President and Chief Sustainability Officer for EcoLab, and we're going to talk a little bit about water stress in the US and how companies are shifting their mentality on this subject. So Emilio, thank you for being here and thanks for being on this call today. We really appreciate your time.
Glad to do it. Looking forward to the conversation.
Yeah, water stress is a huge topic area, especially in the past, toward the second half of 2021. We had a lot of conversations on drought and water stress in the West and whatnot. Could you share some context on this wider conversation regarding water stress that can kind of set the stage for us?
Yes, absolutely. It is just a very interesting journey that we've been on over the last 2 years. As you know, the pandemic, you think about getting everyone healthy, but that also really turned to social justice. It turned to climate and the implications of climate during the last 2 years. Along the way, what has happened is that people have, forgotten about water. And as you know, water stress didn't go away. It actually, if anything, got worse. The world will experience a 56% freshwater deficit by 2030 if nothing changes, according to the World Resource Institute. That's that's an increase from 40% as a gap that the UN projected in 2015. So by 2030, we could see a significant gap if we continue down this road of business as usual. And you mentioned some of the areas around the world that we're experiencing this that we don't often think about. For example, the Western U.S. is in a mega drought. We know about California; that's kind of been in the news already. You got places in the mid South, Texas, that are continue to experience water challenges. Brazil and places like Taiwan. I think what's been in the news is the supply chain challenges that we're all facing, like
Mhm.
semiconductors. Well, a lot of people don't realize that a part of that this past year has been driven by, an extreme drought that Taiwan, which is a semiconductor hub, has been experiencing, as well as some of these other challenges related to the industry. So I think right now, what we're seeing is that water is kind of how we're going to express, how we're going to feel the impacts of climate change. And so we can't often disconnect the topic of water unless we think about climate change. The two are very much connected, and they are for industry as well.
Hmm. Yeah, it's really important. I think within the water industry, we understand how water is kind of this finite resource. Sure, you can reuse it and whatnot, but you are slowly using up the water as well, at least usable water. Because part of water stress isn't necessarily that water doesn't exist; is that water for that purpose that you need it is not available.
Right.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about some of EcoLab's things there too. Could you guys are doing some strong initiatives on this front. Could you explain some of the role that you see your organization playing in helping to solve some of these water stress challenges?
Sure. So as you know, we serve a number of locations around the world in over 40 different industries. We actually serve, it's over 3 million customer locations in over 40 different industries. And we're kind of behind the scenes, but we're also, on the front lines where we see challenges that our customers face, namely in the area of water challenges and water risks. And what we have kind of boiled this down to is kind of a framework of how we work with our customers around helping them mitigate the challenges of water stress. And in some cases, focus on adaptation, meaning that climate change has already taken hold. How do we help them drive more circular practices to manage the water available that they've got or the quality they've got? And so this framework that we typically use is focused on four really key phases. And the steps are, first and foremost, looking at identifying risks, in your operations that are very focused on where you're located. So obviously, water is highly localized, very different than climate. where it's a global issue. Water is obviously very specific to the watershed you're operating in. So for those that are multinationals or even national companies with multiple sites, where you operate and prioritizing those sites of the most acute risk is where many companies are focused today. So we created a tool called the EcoLab Smart Water Navigator that's a free publicly available tool that anyone can use. It's at smartwaternavigator.com. It essentially is a web-based tool that guides companies on their journey towards smart water management.
Mm.
And it really helps organizations understand through data sets that we've loaded in as part of this algorithm to understand the full value of water at that local level, given the local conditions and challenges that they're facing. And so that very first step of the four-step process is around identifying the risks at that local level and in many ways monetizing them so that you can actually do something to take action and make that business case. The second phase is something we refer to as setting meaningful targets. And again, the Smart Water Navigator allows us to utilize a data set from the World Resource Institute on baseline water stress that enables us to look at a threshold of what's considered sustainable water use. And what's
Mm.
really cool about this is that it gives or users, water users at the local level, the ability to actually develop absolute water targets that are more meaningful to the local conditions. And so it may be higher or lower than where they are today. Most of the time it's lower, right? And so the third phase, which gets to your question, is around really implementing solutions once you've
Mhm.
identified the hotspot, once you've set the target that's relevant to your site, is solutions. And what we find, Bob, is that there's a the kind of the challenge that most industry across all the industries that we've worked with is the ability to meter and sub-meter water within the four walls of their operations. Whether you're a hotel, whether you're a power plant or a food and beverage plant, that's a
Mhm.
big challenge. We know how much water is going into the facility. We know how much is going out of the facility, but it's very difficult to see how it actually operates within the facility so that you can optimize water use. And so we've developed a unique solution that was introduced earlier this year called water flow intelligence that enables us to, you know, really add smart meters in throughout the facility that enables us to really get the visibility that we need to understand how water has been put to use to deliver on that manufactured product or that service. And then finally, there's technologies that we've developed that also then allow us to go after where water is perhaps not optimized in a unit operation. Say it's in a brewery and it's a pasteurizer. That's a place that we develop technology like 3D Tracer, which is smart technology that enables us to optimize the cooling and heating use of water within that operation to
Mhm.
really optimize its water use, improve energy efficiency, but also reduce the fouling, improve corrosion, things that may lead to disruption. The
Mhm.
final phase, and I'll stop talking, is about tracking. It's tracking. And we developed a cloud-based platform that connects all these different technologies that I just spoke of into
Mhm.
one platform that
Mm.
enables a manager to see a dashboard of how water, energy, and also their total costs and performance are really on one dashboard so they can actually understand how they're performing against their targets.
Yeah. So the one source of truth, right? You need that one source of truth to say this correlates with that correlates with this, and this is a way that we can like start to work toward this. Like to your point of within the four walls here, which area is our lowest hanging fruit to solve a problem from? Because that's really what I think most of these companies need. They need to know like what is something that we can do easily that will save us some money, so then we can start to snowball into something new. So, how are you guys engaging your customers on in conversations on sustainability as well? I imagine that this is part of this process as well. Like, your providing this framework and using this website to give them these tools and whatnot, how does that how then do you bring that into conversations about sustainability and helping them to reach some targets that they might want to reach?
Well, that's a great question because I think more than ever, given what we said earlier about, you know, the old days of water efficiency goals, Bob, or have kind of gone away. The trend now is to work with industry around developing context-based targets that are
Hmm.
very focused on prioritizing your sites at greatest risk of water availability, water quality, access. And so what's trending now in working with our customers is this concept of having net positive water targets. And net positive water is kind of a vision of how a company interacts within a basin they're operating in, its ecosystem and the community, right? And so it's all about contributing toward reducing water stress around availability, quality, and accessibility, but by ensuring the company's contributions to that watershed, you know, don't exceed, I should say, its impacts in water stress regions. So the way, simple terms, it's about you know giving back to the watershed more than you're taking from it. In many cases, is about reducing that consumptive water use that may not go back to that watershed. And so
Hmm.
that entails really two really key dimensions. One, reducing demand of water coming into your facility, water withdrawal. The second is being able to implement and partner with different stakeholders in the watershed that's at risk, and develop nature-based solutions, which could be reforestation projects, it could
Hmm.
be wetland projects, to restore the balance and increase the availability of water and water quality in that watershed. So that's something that companies are starting to do more of, which allows them to quantify the volumetric benefits that are they're adding, or the water quality benefits back to the watershed. So that's one way. And of course, in working together, you mentioned this. I think engaging customers, but I think there's
Hmm.
this conversation today is a lot about collective action. What we find is that EcoLab is a great industry convener around climate and water. One of the examples of that, we we're the co-founder of the Water Resilience Coalition. That's a coalition that was partnered with the UN and the CEO Water Mandate and the UN Global Compact to bring together CEOs of some of the biggest brands in the world. We started with 7. We're at 27 now. We've been around for about 2 years. The At the heart of this is really raising water stress and some of the challenges we talked about up the corporate agenda, right? And making
Hmm.
this a priority, just like climate is. And we are very much focused on the intersection of water and climate, and building resilience through
Hmm.
things like a pledge called net positive water, right? The one that, as we defined it, and net positive water impact pledge is a way for us to really use that as kind of that North Star, but also to bring together these companies who are actually operating in the same watersheds, right? So we're all like, Southern California is high GDP area, not a lot of water, but you've got companies like EcoLab, you got companies like General Mills, you got companies like Nestle, PepsiCo, Coke, and go on. We're all operating in the same watersheds, or Sao Paulo, Brazil. And so we've defined these priority basins. And I think this is just a shining example of how not only EcoLab, but industry is starting to lean in on water stress around the world.
Yeah. So we talked a lot about like this private company thing, these big companies and the things that they're doing as well. What type of impact does this then trickle to the utility space as well? Obviously, like if there's more water reuse happening within some of these facilities, it reduces that water stress on those utilities. But what
Yes.
what are you seeing in that front? When you do you communicate with any municipalities on like the impacts that these types of things have on them?
Absolutely. That is a very important strategy for companies from a water stewardship perspective. So I think of water stewardship as, water being a shared resource, right, in a
Hmm.
given watershed. Others are dependent on it. It's communities, it's the local industries that are a part of it. It's agriculture, but it's also these other stakeholders, NGOs, but water utilities as well. And so, partnering with the water utilities is an important part of that strategy. And in many ways, it's working on things like you just said, which is maybe if we're in a water stress area like the Santa Ana watershed down in Southern California, is there a purple pipe strategy, for example, where we can actually take non-potable water and
Hmm.
use that in non-potable water applications within an industry, within an operations, that minimizes the water, the fresh water, and the potable water that the rest of the community needs. And so
Hmm.
those are strategies that we want to work with utilities on to really increase resiliency in that area.
Yeah. So looking forward to the rest of 2022, maybe even beyond that, where do you see these conversations on water stress headed? What do you think is next for this conversation? How's it going to evolve?
Well, it's interesting that you bring that up because I think coming out of COP26, which obviously concluded last month, I think what we're sensing is that, this public perception of, companies and governments having to do more around climate and more meaning not just setting pledges or, goals, but
Hmm.
actually defining a glide path on what we need to do this current decade with annual milestones. So this feeling of taking action is going to be a theme that we're going to hear over and over again in 2022 and beyond. And I think water is going to be part of that discussion because we know that in order for us to really drive the resiliency that we need with this changing climate, we're going to have to do we're going to have to rethink the way we manage water. And we believe that smart water management will be something that's going to continue to increase, meaning that digital enablement of how we look at water and energy efficiency will be a key strategy on how we manage this critical resource that we need around water today and into the future.
Yeah. Not to mention the bipartisan infrastructure law that was passed has some water reuse money in there directly related to solving some of these water stress problems. So I'm sure that utilities will be leveraging a lot of that to solve some of these growing problems for them. So, Emilio, thank you so much. I appreciate your time today and chatting with you. For everyone who's watching, we'll have some resources from EcoLab in the description below, so you can check those out and learn some more about what they're doing in the water stress space. And we'll have some links to some articles on our website about water stress as well. So thank you again, Emilio. I really appreciate you taking the time today.
Thanks for having us.